The camera opens on the flicker of hospital lights, rain tapping against cold glass, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoing down sterile corridors. Imagine this, the narrator's voice begins softly, a world-class hospital filled with the most brilliant minds, surgeons, specialists, and professors. Yet not a single one could explain what was happening to the son of the city's most feared mafia boss. A tense pause follows, the sound of a heartbeat monitor echoing in the distance. Hey everyone, welcome back to Swift Tale, the place where stories meet emotion and mystery. And if you're visiting us for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because today's story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, fate, and miracles. The scene zooms in on a shadowy figure standing beside a hospital bed, a man in a black suit, his face cold yet broken, staring at his unconscious son. Doctors move around in panic, their voices hushed, their confidence crumbling. The narrator continues, 100 doctors tried and failed. Every test came back normal, every treatment failed. The boy's condition only worsened, as if life itself was slipping away from him. But then the tone shifts, calmer, quieter, like the whisper of hope in a storm. And when all seemed lost, a janitor, a man who cleaned floors and emptied trash, stepped forward and whispered 3 words that changed everything: I can help. The story promises mystery, emotion, and revelation. What if the answer to life's greatest puzzles doesn't lie in brilliance, but in humility? The narrator asks. Today, we uncover the incredible tale of a desperate father, a dying son, and the humble janitor who defied the odds. A final note before fading into the next scene: stay with us, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a reminder that miracles can come from the most unexpected places. Under the dim glow of a crystal chandelier, Don Vincenzo Russo sat alone in a vast dining hall, his hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the untouched meal before him. The clinking of a grandfather clock filled the silence, each tick echoing through the emptiness of a mansion that once symbolized power, now haunted by fear. Don Russo was not just any man, he was the shadow that ruled the city, the name that made even the police hesitate. To his enemies, he was a storm in human form. To his people, he was both protector and threat. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was just a father who couldn't save his son. His son, Luca, had been his light in a world of darkness. The boy had soft eyes, a quiet smile, and a kindness that contrasted sharply with his father's ruthless ways. Russo had built an empire of steel and fear, but everything he had ever done, every deal, every sin was, in his heart, for Luca's future. And now that future was slipping away in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped without meaning. The mansion that once buzzed with laughter and business meetings now stood silent, heavy with despair. Guards stood outside every door, not knowing what to protect anymore. Inside the boss's private study, doctors from across the world came and went, each one with the same defeated expression. "We are sorry, Mr. Russo. We've never seen anything like this." Those words had become a cruel anthem, replayed over and over, slicing through the boss's heart like a blade. In his rage, Don Russo shattered a glass of whiskey against the wall. "Money, power, connections, what use are they when they can't save my blood?" he roared. His most loyal men exchanged worried glances, but said nothing. The Don's pain was something even his enemies would have pitied. Late that night, he stood outside his son's hospital room, watching through the glass. Luca lay motionless, his chest rising faintly with each mechanical breath. Tubes and wires ran across his fragile body. The mafia boss, who had once faced bullets without flinching, now trembled at the sight of his child's stillness. In desperation, he turned to his right-hand man, Matteo. "Find me the best doctors in the world. I don't care what it costs. I don't care if you have to drag them here. Do you understand me? No one rests until my boy opens his eyes again." Matteo nodded, his voice low. "Yes, Don." The orders spread across continents, calls made to elite hospitals, medical conferences interrupted, private jets chartered overnight. Within days, 100 of the world's top specialists arrived: neurologists, infectious disease experts, geneticists, cardiologists, all gathered under one roof. The hospital transformed into a fortress under the Don's command. Every corridor whispered of power, fear, and hopelessness. Yet behind all the wealth and intimidation, a broken man prayed in silence. For the first time in his life, Don Vincenzo Russo didn't want revenge, control, or fear. He wanted a miracle. And as the night deepened and rain began to fall again over the city, he whispered softly to himself, "If anyone out there can save my boy, I'll give them everything." Little did he know that someone was already there, sweeping floors, unnoticed, listening quietly as fate prepared to turn the tables. The soft hum of machines filled Luca's hospital room. White curtains fluttered gently, with the cold night breeze sneaking in through the slightly open window. The moonlight washed over his pale face, making him look even more fragile than he was. A boy who once ran through the gardens of his father's mansion, laughing freely, now lay still, his life dangling between breaths, his small fingers occasionally twitching as if fighting an invisible battle. It began a month ago, innocently, quietly. A mild fever, a bit of fatigue, the kind any parent would brush off as nothing serious. But by the second week, the symptoms had grown strange. Luca would collapse suddenly, his body trembling as if struck by lightning, his eyes rolling back for mere seconds before he regained consciousness. Each time it happened, Don Russo's heart stopped a little more. When the family doctor couldn't explain it, specialists were flown in. They ran every test known to modern medicine: blood tests, MRI scans, neurological exams, heart monitoring. Everything came back normal. No tumors, no infections, no signs of poison. The boy's body was a mystery, a perfect vessel slowly shutting down for no reason anyone could see. The first doctor said it might be a rare viral infection. The second suspected a neurological disorder. The 10th suggested genetic testing. The 50th recommended an experimental drug, but nothing worked. With each failed attempt, Luca's body weakened. His once vibrant eyes turned dull, and his soft voice that used to call, "Papa," faded into silence. Don Russo began to lose control. He threatened the medical staff, smashed equipment, and even fired a doctor for suggesting that maybe, just maybe, Luca's illness was beyond saving. "There's always a way," he growled. "You find it, or I'll find someone who will." Fear filled every corridor of the hospital. Nurses trembled at the sight of the Mafia boss. Doctors whispered in secret meetings, their hands shaking as they discussed test results that made no sense. The 100th doctor, a world-renowned neurologist, stood before the Don one evening with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Russo," he said, "we've exhausted every possible diagnosis. Your son's condition defies medical logic. It's as if his body is reacting to something unseen, something we cannot measure." The Don slammed his fist on the table. "Then measure the unseen. You think I care about your excuses?" His voice thundered across the room, echoing through the walls like a gunshot. But deep inside, even the boss was beginning to break. He would sit by Luca's bedside for hours, watching the monitors beep. Sometimes he'd whisper old stories from when Luca was little, stories about how they'd build a better life, far away from crime. He would gently hold his son's hand, his tough exterior melting away. "You're my only light, Luca," he would murmur. "Don't you dare leave me." Outside the room, nurses wept silently. The entire hospital had fallen into an eerie rhythm of fear and failure. The Mafia guards stood like statues, and the doctors walked on eggshells. Yet amidst the chaos, someone quiet watched everything from the background: the janitor, Marco. Every morning, he mopped the floors outside Luca's room. He noticed things no one else did: the way the boy's breathing changed when certain disinfectants were used, or how the flicker of fluorescent lights made his fingers twitch. He wasn't a man of power or education, but he had a sharp eye born from years of quiet observation. And while the doctors focused on complex reports and machines, Marco simply watched. Night after night, the situation worsened. Luca began having episodes where his heartbeat would slow dangerously, alarms blaring as doctors rushed in. They'd inject him, shock him, save him, only for it to happen again. No pattern, no explanation. One rainy evening, Don Russo stood at the window overlooking the city. His reflections stared back at him, a man who owned everything yet couldn't protect what mattered most. "What kind of father am I?" he whispered, voice cracking. His men pretended not to hear. In the silence that followed, the janitor quietly passed behind him, pushing his mop. No one noticed, But in Marco's eyes burned a question he dared not speak. What if they're all looking in the wrong place? And so, as the storm raged outside and hope seemed nearly gone, a single whisper of fate drifted through the halls of that grand hospital. A whisper that the answer to the mystery was not hidden in medical charts or machines, but in the keen eyes of a man who wasn't supposed to matter. By the third week of Luca's hospitalization, the hospital no longer felt like a place of healing. It had transformed into a fortress ruled by fear. Men in black suits guarded every entrance. Surveillance cameras were installed overnight. Every hallway echoed with tension. The once busy chatter of doctors and nurses had been replaced by whispers and hurried footsteps. The Mafia boss's presence loomed everywhere, his influence, his money, his wrath. At the main entrance, a luxury car convoy arrived daily, delivering more doctors from around the world. Each new expert came with promises of breakthroughs, yet left with the same hollow look of defeat. The hospital administration, terrified of crossing Don Russo, had turned the top floor into his private domain. No one entered without clearance. Even the staff had to surrender their phones before walking those corridors. Inside Luca's room, machines hummed quietly, their beeps marking time like the ticking of a countdown clock. The chief surgeon, Dr. Adrian Cole, a man once known for his arrogance and confidence, now walked with a shadow behind his eyes. He had never failed a patient before, but this case was breaking him. Every morning he gathered his team for briefings, voice trembling slightly as he spoke. "We must keep trying. There has to be something we're missing." But everyone in that room knew they were running out of ideas. Nurses moved like ghosts through the halls, their faces pale from sleepless nights. Some had quit out of fear, unable to handle the pressure. Others stayed because they knew leaving could mean more than losing a job. It could mean losing their lives. Rumors spread that one specialist who tried to flee the city was found the next day, his car abandoned near the river. No one dared to ask questions. Don Russo spent his days in silence, his nights in rage. The hospital walls had become his prison. Every hour he'd walk into Luca's room, stare at the machines, and whisper the same words, "You keep fighting, my boy, Papa's here." He refused to believe the doctor's quiet murmurs that there was nothing left to do. To him, defeat was not an option, it was betrayal. In a quiet corner of the hospital, away from the chaos, Marco the janitor swept the floors, unnoticed as always. He watched the tired faces of doctors, the trembling hands of nurses, and the emptiness in the Mafia boss's eyes. He saw things others missed. He saw the nurse who changed Luca's IV bag too quickly, the way a certain chemical cleaner made the boy's monitor spike, the faint tremor in Luca's hand each time the air conditioning turned on. Small details, invisible to those too busy with theories and pride. At night, Marco would mop the hallway outside Luca's room. He moved slowly, almost rhythmically, his eyes lingering on the machines through the glass. One evening, he overheard two nurses whispering. "They say the boy's cursed," one said shakily. "Maybe it's punishment for what his father's done." The other nurse glanced nervously down the hall. "SHH, don't say that out loud. You'll get us killed." The janitor lowered his head, pretending not to listen, but their words lingered in his mind. Cursed. No, he didn't believe in curses. He believed in cause and effect, in details, in patterns, and something about this boy's sickness didn't feel like fate, it felt like a clue waiting to be noticed. Meanwhile, the hospital's chief administrator called an emergency meeting with Don Russo and the medical staff. The tension was unbearable. "Mr. Russo," the administrator began carefully, "we're doing everything possible, but—" But Don Russo's voice was cold, his glare sharp enough to silence the room. "But we're out of conventional options," the man stammered. "Perhaps it's time to accept the possibility that—" "Say it," Russo growled. "That your son may not." Before he could finish, the Don slammed his hand on the table. Papers flew. "He will live," he snarled. "I don't care if it takes 1,000 doctors. Do you understand me? 1,000. No one dared to breathe. The boss stood, his shadow long and dark under the harsh fluorescent lights. Then he turned and left, the echo of his footsteps filling the silent room like the toll of a warning bell. After that meeting, fear became the hospital's heartbeat. Every sound felt louder. Every mistake felt fatal. Doctors double-checked everything twice. Nurses cried quietly in the locker room. Even the janitor began to feel the weight of the despair pressing on everyone. But while others drowned in fear, Marco began to see more clearly. He started to notice subtle changes, the flicker of the lights when Luca's condition worsened, the chemical scent lingering after certain rooms were cleaned, the way the air purifier near Luca's bed sometimes made a faint crackling sound. The janitor didn't have a medical degree, he didn't have a title or authority, but he had something far more powerful: attention. He watched not with arrogance, but with humility. And sometimes that's what the world overlooks most, the quiet eyes that truly see. In that hospital, where science had failed and fear ruled, one man with a mop and a heart full of empathy was about to uncover the secret that 100 doctors couldn't. The night shift was Marco's favorite time. When the world outside slept and the hospital lights dimmed to a soft blue glow, he felt invisible, free to move quietly through the corridors without being told where he didn't belong. The hum of machines, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the echo of his mop gliding across the floor were the only sounds that kept him company. But behind those tired eyes and quiet steps lived a mind sharper than anyone could imagine. Marco had been a janitor at St. Lucius Hospital for nearly 5 years. To most, he was just the cleaning guy, polite, quiet, easy to overlook. He spoke little, smiled when greeted, and never complained about overtime. But there was something different about the way he looked at things. He noticed everything. The smallest flicker of a light, the faintest smell of chemicals, the subtle shift in air temperature, all details most people ignored. He had seen more than his fair share of pain in these halls, mothers weeping, families praying, and doctors losing hope. But nothing had shaken the hospital quite like the case of Don Russo's son. Marco had cleaned outside that room every day since Luca arrived, and with every passing shift, he saw the fear grow thicker, the energy heavier, the hope dimmer. One night as he mopped the hallway, Marco paused. Through the narrow window of the ICU door, he saw Luca's body twitch slightly, just a flicker, a faint motion, as the air purifier next to his bed emitted a low buzzing hum. Marco tilted his head, watching closely. A few seconds later, the boy's heart monitor spiked briefly, then returned to normal. No one else noticed. The doctors were in conference. The nurses were switching shifts. Only Marco saw it. He leaned on his mop handle and whispered to himself, "That's strange." Over the next few nights, he kept watching. Every time the purifier turned on, Luca's vitals fluctuated. Every time the nurses sprayed disinfectant near the room, his breathing quickened. And once, when a nurse accidentally left the window open, letting in fresh air, Marco saw the boy's pulse stabilize, even for just a moment. To anyone else, it might have seemed like coincidence. But Marco had learned long ago that coincidences often hide the truth. He began taking notes, scribbles on small scraps of paper he kept in his pocket. Airflow, right arrow, better breathing. Disinfectant use, right arrow, muscle twitch. Light flicker, right arrow, reaction. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but he was sure of one thing: it wasn't a curse. It was something real, something in the environment, something the doctors were too proud or too tired to see. During a coffee break one night, a young nurse named Clara noticed Marco sitting alone in the staff room, flipping through his small notepad. "What are you always writing, Marco?" she asked kindly. He smiled faintly. "Just patterns, things I notice." She laughed softly. "Patterns? You sound like one of the doctors." Marco's smile faded a little. "I used to be something like that," he whispered under his breath. She didn't catch the words, or maybe she chose not to press. But deep inside, Marco carried a secret. Years ago, before tragedy and politics destroyed his life, he had been a neurologist, a brilliant one. He had worked in one of the country's top research hospitals, studying rare brain and immune disorders. But when he exposed a pharmaceutical scandal that endangered patients, powerful men had silenced him. His license was revoked, his name blacklisted, his career erased. All he had left was his knowledge and his conscience. And so, he cleaned floors now, but that didn't mean he'd stopped seeing. As the nights went on, Marco's observations became more precise. He started timing the air purifier cycles, noting the changes in Luca's vitals. He even began swapping out cleaning supplies on his own, choosing neutral ones without chemical scents. When he did, Luca's condition improved ever so slightly, his pulse steadier, his breathing deeper. It was small, almost invisible, but it was real. One night, as he cleaned, Marco heard the chief surgeon yelling inside the staff office. "We've tried everything. The scans show nothing. The blood work is clean, and yet he's dying right in front of us." Marco hesitated outside the door, listening as another doctor said, "The boss is going to kill us if we don't find something soon." The janitor sighed quietly, gripping his mop. "You're all looking so high," he muttered to himself. "You've forgotten to look low." Later that night, as he passed Luca's room again, he stopped once more at the sound of the purifier crackling faintly. He frowned, then slowly stepped inside when no one was watching. His heart pounded. He knew if anyone caught him, he could lose his job or worse. But something deep in his gut told him he had to act. He approached the machine, examined its vents, and noticed a faint, sticky residue on the filter, yellowish, strange-smelling. He sniffed cautiously and felt his eyes water. Some kind of industrial chemical. He backed away, coughing quietly. The air purifier wasn't helping the boy, it was poisoning him. Marco's eyes widened. "My God," he whispered. At that moment, Luca's monitor beeped irregularly again. The janitor's hands trembled as he glanced at the sleeping child. "You've been breathing this in," he said softly. "No wonder the doctors couldn't find it. They were searching inside you, but the killer was around you." For the first time in years, Marco felt something awaken inside him, the same instinct, the same fire he once had as a doctor. And as he looked at the boy's frail body, he knew what he had to do. He turned toward the door, determination in his eyes, and whispered to himself, "It's time someone listened." Next morning, the hospital was in chaos. Luca's condition had worsened overnight. His oxygen levels dropped, his heartbeat erratic. Doctors rushed in and out of the room, barking orders, scrambling for answers that didn't exist. The beeping monitors filled the air like the ticking of doom. Don Russo stood outside the room, hands clenched, jaw tight, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Around him, the world's finest doctors argued among themselves, each desperate to defend their expertise, to prove they weren't the ones failing. "We've done everything possible," one said. "It must be genetic," another countered. "Impossible, his tests are clear," a third snapped. In the middle of their shouting, Marco stood quietly at the end of the hallway, holding his mop like a staff, his mind racing. He had spent the entire night thinking, replaying every pattern, every reaction, every faint sign he'd seen. The purifier, the chemicals, the residue, it all fit. And now, watching the boy's life slip away, he couldn't stay silent any longer. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said softly. No one heard him. He spoke louder. "Excuse me." The doctors turned, irritated. "What is it?" one snapped. Marco swallowed hard. I think I know what's wrong with the boy." For a moment there was silence, then laughter. The chief surgeon crossed his arms. You're a janitor. Please, stay out of matters you don't understand." Marco didn't back down. His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. "You've tested his blood, his brain, his heart, but you never tested the air he's breathing." The room fell quiet again. Even Don Russo turned slowly toward him, his expression unreadable. "What did you just say?" Marco took a cautious step forward. "The air purifier in the boy's room, it's releasing a toxic compound. I've seen it. It reacts when it overheats, and the chemical, it's causing his symptoms. Muscle spasms, breathing irregularities, the seizures." The chief surgeon scoffed. "That's absurd. We monitor air quality daily." "No, you don't," Marco replied, his voice gaining strength. "You monitor temperature and oxygen saturation, not volatile compounds. You've been looking for a disease when it's a contamination." Don Russo's glare turned sharp. "If you're lying," he said coldly, stepping closer, "I will make sure you never speak again." Marco met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not lying, sir. Please let me prove it. Just turn off the purifier for 12 hours, clean the room, let him breathe fresh air. You'll see the difference." The doctors exchanged nervous looks. One whispered, "This is madness. We can't risk the boy's condition on superstition." Russo silenced them with a raised hand. "Madness? 100 of you failed me. and now a man with a mop is the only one offering hope. He stared at Marco for a long moment, studying his face. You have one chance. If you're wrong, he leaned in, his voice a whisper laced with steel. You die. Marco nodded, then I'll die trying to save him. The boss turned to the chief surgeon. Do it. The order sent shockwaves through the staff. The purifier was turned off. The nurses cleaned every inch of the room, scrubbing it with neutral solutions. Windows were opened, fresh air flooding in for the first time in weeks. The doctors stood by with folded arms, skeptical but powerless. Marco stayed nearby, quietly watching, notebook in hand. Hours passed. Luca's breathing steadied. His heartbeat grew stronger. By evening, his temperature normalized for the first time in days. The doctors stared at the monitors in disbelief. Impossible, one muttered. The chief surgeon leaned forward, eyes wide. His vitals are improving. Don Russo stood frozen at the doorway, his hands trembling slightly. What did you do? Marco took a slow breath. I did what none of you thought to do. I listened to the room, not the reports. For the first time, the mighty Don's voice broke. If this boy wakes up because of you. He couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, he turned toward the window, gripping the edge of the curtain tightly, hiding the tears that finally escaped. Behind him, Marco whispered softly, almost to himself, it's not about who you are, it's about what you notice. The doctors stood in silence, their pride shattered, their science humbled. That night, as the hospital quieted and hope cautiously returned, the janitor who had once been invisible had become the center of everything. And though he didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. The next test, the one that would prove his theory beyond doubt, would change every life in that building forever. The hospital had never felt so still. Every hallway, every room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The rumor had spread like wildfire. The janitor had told the Mafia boss how to save his son. Some called it madness. Others whispered it might be a miracle, but no one dared say it aloud within Don Russo's earshot. For the next 12 hours, Luca's room remained untouched by the machines that had surrounded him for weeks. The air purifier, once humming endlessly, was silent. The windows stayed open, letting the cold night breeze sweep through the room, carrying with it a strange, clean calmness that the place hadn't known in a long time. Marco stayed outside the room the entire time, mopping, cleaning, pretending to work, but his eyes never left the monitors. He could see Luca's chest rising a little easier, the lines on the screens smoothing out, the violent beeps turning into steady rhythms. It was slow, fragile progress, but it was real. The chief surgeon entered with his team, clipboard in hand, his voice uncertain for the first time. His pulse has stabilized, oxygen saturation improving, temperature normalizing. He looked up at the Don, disbelief etched across his face. This shouldn't be happening. Don Russo's sharp eyes turned toward Marco. Shouldn't be happening, he repeated coldly, but it is. By morning, something even more shocking occurred. Luca's fingers twitched, his eyelids fluttered. A nurse gasped. He's responding. The Don moved to his son's bedside, his hands trembling as he gently brushed the boy's hair. Luca, mio figlio, he whispered, voice cracking with emotion. For the first time in weeks, Luca's faint voice broke the silence. Papa. It was just one word, weak, soft, barely audible, but it was enough to shatter the Iron Man's composure. The Don fell to his knees beside the bed, tears rolling down his face as he whispered, I'm here, my boy, I'm right here. Behind them, the room filled with stunned silence. Doctors who had spent sleepless nights over charts and data now stood frozen, their faces pale with the realization that the janitor had done what they could not. Dr. Cole, the chief surgeon, finally turned to Marco. We need to know what you did, everything. Marco nodded. I didn't do anything miraculous, he said softly. I just paid attention. He explained what he'd discovered, the strange residue in the purifier filter, the way Luca's vitals reacted to certain chemicals and changes in airflow. I believe the machine was releasing trace amounts of an industrial-grade neurotoxin. It's not detectable in standard hospital tests, but long-term exposure can cause seizures, paralysis, and organ failure. The doctors listened in shock. "You're saying this was poisoning him all along?" one asked. "Yes," Marco replied, his tone steady. "Not a disease, not genetics, just poison in plain sight." The Don stood, anger mixing with relief. "Who installed that purifier?" he demanded. The administrator stammered. "It was imported from overseas, part of the new hospital equipment." "Imported from where?" the Don barked. "Shanghai," the man whispered. "It was donated by one of your associates." Don Russo's eyes darkened. The implication hit like thunder. Betrayal. Someone from his own circle had tried to kill his son slowly, silently, through something as harmless as clean air. His jaw clenched. Find out who. But before he stormed off, he turned to Marco. The fury in his expression softened into something rare, gratitude. "You saved my son," he said quietly, "and you did it with nothing but your eyes and your heart." Marco lowered his gaze humbly. "I only did what anyone should do, look where no one else wanted to." That day, the air purifier was dismantled and tested. The results confirmed Marco's theory beyond all doubt. The filters contained a rare compound that, when heated, released trace neurotoxins. Someone had tampered with it, deliberately. It wasn't just an accident, it was an attempted murder. The revelation hit the media like a bomb. The city buzzed with the story of the Mafia boss's son, saved not by science, not by power, but by a janitor who noticed what others ignored. In the hospital, the staff treated Marco differently now. The same doctors who once ignored him now nodded respectfully as he passed. Nurses whispered his name in awe, but Marco didn't bask in it. He just smiled politely in.